So let's talk about the Middle East. I think we're on the brink of something really bad. It's like things are getting worse with each passing day, and we are at the doorstep of economic Armageddon, and maybe a literal one as well. So there are breaking updates that I want to share with you all, and it concerns America's fight for hegemony. It involves the oil markets and how everything is pointing towards massive inflation. So this Middle East crisis is going to shake the foundations of the world order, and you'll quickly see that sides are already being chosen. And for today, we have to focus on the two biggest players in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia as well as Iran. And in our lead story today, Saudi Arabia puts Israel deal on ice amidst the conflict and engages with Iran. And this is a big deal. There are even reports that Saudi Arabia has told the United States that a normalization deal is off. And if you sit back and you think about it, that's the only card the Saudis can play at this moment. They have issued a statement that showed concern for the other side, trying to normalize any relations now with Israel. Just doesn't make sense. And if you read into the statement by Jake Sullivan, he is trying to desperately justify this pause by calling it not formal, and the focus is now helping Israel. Now that's all fine and dandy, but this tells us that America really wants the deal. They need the deal to go through to retain influence in the Middle East, but because of the conflict, their plan has been derailed. They have essentially lost the only bargaining chip left with the Saudis that might prevent them from joining BRICS in 2024. They have also lost more influence in trying to get the Saudis to pump more oil to bring inflation down as well. And it's very interesting that Saudi Arabia was even considering pumping more oil to seal the deal. But whether that was genuine or not, or simply a rumor, it really doesn't matter anymore. The OPEC oil cuts are here to stay. Over a million barrels per day of Saudi oil has left the markets all the way to 2024. And there's no good reason left for MBS to save the global oil markets by increasing production, right? Especially if the conflict is starting to spread and potentially involve Iran. And that's why Blinken was sent scrambling to Saudi Arabia to talk with MBS. Now, they definitely talk about Israel, but I'm quite sure the normalization deal and oil were on the agenda. And this is where things took a turn for the worse, at least for the United States. During the meeting, MBS was focused on finding a peaceful solution, which included lifting the Israeli blockade. Now, we know the chances of that aren't very high. The evacuation order has already been issued, so it's just a matter of time. So, this whole situation is simply a big test of America defending the existing world order that they helped to create, and things are not looking good at all. And let's recall the losses America had. First, there was the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. We can't forget that. Then BRICS expanded to include Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran. The big oil giants, they joined the economic bloc outside of the G7, and this is a big deal. Then we have the Iran-Saudi peace deal, the one that China brokered, right? And all these are economic and diplomatic losses. It is in America's best interest to ensure this conflict doesn't get out of hand, or else two things will happen. And the first will be a draining away of trust in the US as a peacemaker that can solve problems in the Gulf, and it seems that they are losing on that front. And according to US officials, the conflict could widen beyond Israel. We have growing clashes along the northern border with Lebanon, and that could be another front opening, which is a horrendous development. So the top brass in America, they are freaking out about potential spread. They are losing control of the region, and that leaves them with two impossible choices. Either they withdraw and they let the Gulf sort themselves out, or they double down on the current plan, and either choice is going to be a disaster. So if they withdraw and they simply leave, it'll be on a scale worse than Afghanistan, and all the security promises will now ring hollow. No one will trust the security agreements with the US anymore, especially the Saudis. But if they continue tripling down the support, this is going to cost so much financially, and this conflict could push America and the world into recession. And those are just the economic impacts. So what's America really going to do? It is a trap no matter where they turn. And listen to this headline from Bloomberg. Deal between US, Saudi, Israel, UAE can contain Iran nuclear program. And it gets much clearer why we could be in this situation today. And with the Saudis now actively engaging with the Iranians, it's a diplomatic disaster for America's Middle East ambitions. But something interesting also happened over the week. Saudi Arabia has publicly defended China's Belt Road Initiative during the IMF conference in Morocco. They're actively defending China's lending to developing countries. That is a game changer. It is a slap to the face of America, which keeps calling the loans a Chinese debt trap. China stepped up when people actually fled away from Africa. China built infrastructure that they cannot carry with them to China. It will actually be in Africa. China took the risk when people didn't want to take the risk. He's calling for love and understanding for China. He's calling for solutions instead of the constant demonization. And to the United States, this is an economic nightmare scenario. So just think of the consequences if things continue to destabilize under America's watch. The Middle East will move closer towards China and the BRICS. It's basically a collapse of US leadership. And this collapse is accelerating fast. I think we all remembered Biden's warning to Iran. He told the Iranians to be careful, whatever that meant, right? But now Iran has reversed the situation with their own scary warning. They have given a warning to Israel if they decide to move in from the ground. And this is a warning of regional escalation that we can't take lightly. It's really bone chilling, and all I can say is that the consequences will plunge the Middle East into chaos. If you think the economic pain we felt from Russia Ukraine was bad, it is nothing compared to the coming eruption if things keep spiraling down. In a telephone conversation with Qatar, the Iranian president mentioned how no one can guarantee that the situation will be under control and the scope of the conflict won't expand. And if a second front does open on the northern border with Lebanon, then all bets are seriously off. We are talking about total infrastructure damage. We are talking about oil and gas production getting threatened. Obviously, America's not going to sit back and do nothing. In fact, the Pentagon has now ordered a second carrier strike group to sail towards the Middle East. Now we have doubled the firepower in the region, and it's not just the USS Gerald Ford anymore, but the USS Eisenhower as well. And there's a risk of escalation that could involve operations on land, operations on air, and sea. Even the United Nations is saying that the Middle East is on the verge of the abyss. And understand that America will be aiding Israel all the way to the end. Blinken has told them that the US is always by your side. So if escalation happens, you can expect the US to be involved in one way or another. If we look at the financial implications, this isn't good either. We are looking at another inflation nightmare just waiting to happen. In a report by Reuters, Senate leader Chuck Schumer says the chamber will rush through military aid to Israel. And I think this tells you the priority of Israel versus Ukraine in the grand scheme of things. It really tells you how important the Gulf region is to the US. Jake Sullivan has confirmed that the amount will be more than $2 billion. And here's what's interesting, they are bundling Ukraine together with the aid to Israel, so this number is going to balloon up. And as we said countless times before, a conflict is highly inflationary, but this time, Yellen has to issue more bonds to raise the money as well. We are facing a further collapse of the bond markets while military spending will continue to drain supply of all the commodities around the world. And the big threat is supply side inflation, especially in the oil markets. And anytime the Middle East gets into a conflict, we have to pay attention because they are the oil supplier to the world. The bulk of the world's oil gets produced by the OPEC nations there. They pump it out of the ground and then they export the bulk of it to the entire world. So if there's any supply disruption here, it will impact every country on planet Earth. That is a guarantee. And let's say an escalation happens that involves Iran. How will America respond? And let's first consider economic retaliation first, because a military one would be unthinkable. Well, the US will likely tighten their oil sanctions on Iran. That's the most convenient tool. Just choke out their oil revenues to hurt them financially. And just this week, the United States imposed the first sanctions on tanker owners for transporting Russian oil below the price caps. Now, the price caps are nothing new, but this is sanctions enforcement. And if it could happen to Russia, the US can also enforce the sanctions on Iranian oil. Now, this might shock you, but Iranian oil has been flowing in strength to the markets. Since 2020, they have gone from under half a million barrels a day to well over 1.5 million. And that is triple the amount of oil, and with prices so high, it's probably 5 or 6 times the revenue for Iran. Basically, they are raking it in. And if we look at the latest data, Iran has gone above 2 million barrels of crude and oil products exports. Just from January to August, the oil exports have essentially doubled. It only happened because the United States themselves didn't want to enforce them. Officials have privately acknowledged they have relaxed some enforcements of sanctions on Iranian oil sales. And we have to ask ourselves why. Why did America allow Iranian oil to flow? Maybe it was part of keeping Iran happy to let the Saudi-Israel deal go through. It could have been part of a US agenda to temper relations with Iran as well. But that totally doesn't matter now. All that progress has been thrown out of the window. It has literally gone up in flames, which means The US could be moving to enforce oil sanctions on Iran if things escalate. Biden might be forced to tighten his grip on Iran, and a likely option is to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is a last resort, but we can't totally rule it out. There have already been interactions between the US Navy and Iranian forces there. And once again, I need to re emphasize how important the Strait of Hormuz is. This is a choke point which serves the majority of the OPEC nations: Iraq, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, and of course Iran. They are all located there. They all rely on this shipping lane to get their oil out to the world. Imagine the chaos if the United States and Iran goes at it here. If a blockade happens from either side, the entire oil supply chain in the Middle East will literally break down. And this is the world's most important oil transit choke point. Over 20 million barrels per day of oil goes through the strait, and that is at least 20% of global oil consumption. That is extremely frightening. Just look at the shipping traffic along the strait. Do you see all those colorful arrows, especially the ones in red? Those are the tankers transporting oil from the Gulf nations to the world. And this is a close choke point. This means there's no going around it. There are simply no other alternatives. So when we say there's a potential oil crisis, this is not some wild claim or hyperbole. It's just plain reality. But there's another supply shock that not many people are talking about. If this happens together with the Hormuz block, then inflation will spike to the moon. Let's head back to the nautical map again. Does this look familiar? Well, it's the Suez Canal located in Egypt, which is next to Israel. Egypt is already starting to reinforce their border with troops just in case things spill over. The danger of any disruption here goes beyond just the oil markets. Yes, European oil and gas supplies will get delayed. Ships will have to go around Africa to bring energy to the EU. But we are talking about cargo ships carrying consumer goods as well. Those are going to be delayed. Your Amazon purchases, the stuff that you bought online, is going to be delayed. And that means extra cost to swing shipments around the world. And this is literally an economic disaster waiting to happen if the conflict spreads all the way to Egypt. The Suez Canal could be impacted in a very negative way. And there's also the Chinese variable, right? Let's not forget that China has been importing a ton of Iranian oil over the past 10 years. We can see volumes have been increasing over the past 2 years. China is now bringing in 1.5 million barrels of Iranian oil for their domestic consumption. China needs that oil to grow their industries, and if that gets disrupted, China could take a hit which will slow down the global economy even further, and this impacts China's energy security as well. So it's important to understand how volatile the situation really is. Even Anthony Blinken is now asking China to intervene to prevent any further escalation. He's calling for China to help influence Iran, but apart from sending diplomats or envoys, there's really nothing much Beijing can do. We are literally sitting on a powder keg and holding a deck of wild cards to boot. There are literally no limits to how bad the situation can get. I think we have to prepare for higher oil prices to spike even further. The inflation fight is far from over, and at least for interest rates, we are definitely going to stay higher for longer, unless, of course, the entire economy implodes first. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Will oil prices breach $100 soon? And how will this situation evolve? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.